And Dean asks, "What's up with the creepy ass mask?" And Sam explains that it's a plague mask that doctors use because they thought they filtered out disease. And Meadows was wearing one when he was caught and they had to rip it off. And we're going to talk about what's up with that creepy ass mask. So this is lore. And we're going to talk about plague doctors, and this is going to get real gross. But first, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's boring. Nothing I say is ever boring, but, or dry, because everything I say is interesting, but it's less pussy at the beginning. That's what I'm going to say. So,
Ew.
yeah, the pus doesn't come until later. So, plague doctors were hired by European towns as government contractors specifically to treat plague patients. While most towns already had doctors, those doctors were in private practice and didn't want to die from the plague. In Venice, only one of 18 physicians stayed during the plague outbreak of 1348. They were just like, see ya, I don't want to deal with this, right? So generally the plague doctors were new physicians or those doctors who couldn't really do well in private practice or just volunteers who thought they could help after seeing like other people doing it. Like this really reminds me of Miracle Workers, the Dark Ages season, where she's like, I want to be a doctor. And he's like, this is all you have to do to be a doctor. That's what I feel like the plague doctor's like.
Got it. Yeah.
So the contracts of many plague doctors have survived, and that does give us insight into their pay and their duties. Their roles were more administrative than medical, as they were tasked with tracking the number of plague deaths and bearing witness to the dying's last requests and wills. So, people would come in like, oh, I have the plague. No one else wants to be there but the plague doctor. So this is what happens to all my stuff. If hopefully the plague doctor was honest and would tell the
The real
accurately
thing and
what
not
you said.
steal it. Yeah.
Right. They also occasionally did perform autopsies. Some had roles in organizing burials. Usually, in that capacity, they were the ones to signal to the corpse bearers that it was time to collect the dead. So they weren't like carrying the bodies out, but they were the ones who'd be like, "Yep, this one's officially dead. He's not, he's not faking it, or mostly dead. He's all dead." And then
dead.
he's mostly dead. And then they bring out your dead, and then the wagon would come by and they pick him up. That's historically accurate. So they also certified the house as plague free after the required quarantine period was filled, meaning that the survivors could then re-enter society. So that was an important thing that they did. Within their contracts, they were required to treat everybody in town, regardless of economic status. Although wealthier customers were likely to be sold additional tinctures and protective potions, because you have the extra bucks, so you get the good stuff. The doctor was supposed to not charge for her services, but the plague customer could offer money. Their salary, though, was usually more than enough to make charging unnecessary. The plague doctor hired for the city of Orvieto, Italy in 1348 was paid 4 times a doctor's salary. The Italian town of Pavia created a contract for Giovanni di Ventura in 1479, and he was offered 30 florins a month, which was equal to about 40 grams of pure gold, which I have no idea how to relate to modern currency. The Newcastle blog gave the comparison that a skilled worker in the same town would struggle to earn 60 florins over 200 days. And this is just the world's worst word problem.
Yeah.
It's just to say they had a good living while you lasted. Giovanni was also offered a free furnished house and citizenship in Pavia as long as he didn't fuck up. The town also agreed in the contract to keep a barber surgeon on the payroll to lance plague boils because that was too gross for physicians to do. The town's attitudes toward the doctors shifted as public sentiment surrounding pandemics evolved. Sometimes they were welcomed and even held for ransom, which many sources cited as evidence that they were valued. They were like, yeah, they were really liked here. They would hold him for ransom, which is a very strange way of saying, I value your place in my society. But anyhow, when people were just over the sickness and over the plague doctors would be mocked, they'd be vilified. And the contracts would sometimes have to include protection against the angry mobs who blamed the plague doctors for spreading the plague. There were also the unscrupulous plague doctors who ran off with their dying patients' money or sometimes sold literal snake oil remedies. And it was a lonely life, as oddly nobody wanted to hang out with the dude who just came from the plague house. And an isolation requirement was often included in the plague doctor's contract.
Yeah. That seems like tough to make friends.
A little hard. So, the most destructive period of the plague was between 1346 and 1353, during which some experts estimate that half of the European population died. And typically, the plague ran in 15 to 20-year cycles. And so, plague doctors just became part of a public health strategy because it was happening so often. So, it would just be like, oh, we're having a plague. It's time to just bust out this contract, right? And Italian city states really prided themselves on their response plans. Like Venice had the world's first permanent plague hospital and quarantine station, and they had that as early as the 1400s. The plague had a particularly good time in Italy during the 1650s, killing over 1 million people. The plague doctors, Medicio della Pesta, and their outfits became a common sight. In 1656, the German engraver Gerhard Altenbach printed an image of a plague doctor in his outfit. Then the same year, the satirical version of that came out in an engraving called Dr. Schnabel von Rome, or Dr. Beaky from Rome. I love that his name is Dr. Beaky. And it was by Paulus First, which has since become the iconic picture of a plague doctor. First included some snark in there about how the doctor only scares people and takes their money. All right, so here comes some grossness. So if you're really easily grossed out, you might want to skip ahead about a minute. All right, medieval treatments for the plague were based on the prevailing theory that there were 4 bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, that needed to remain in balance, and that the plague was a pestilential fever that caused buboes, which sounds much cuter than they are. That are swollen lymph nodes that are filled with blood and pus. Now, since buboes tended to form in the groin, armpits, and neck, plague doctors concluded that the body was being dominated by black bile, known as melancholia, and that it was being expelled from the nearest major organs, the liver, the heart, and the brain. So to balance the humors, the doctor's plans included, and this kind of goes from least gross to most gross. So the doctor's plans included changing what you eat, including eating applesauce, mustard, or mint sauce. Delightful. Taking medications that cause beneficial vomiting and urination. Not so fun. And bloodletting. The not honestly the least fun. Here comes some least fun. Sometimes doctors would rub feces on the patient. And if the patient didn't have enough of their own feces, there was always the option of dropping them in an open sewer.
No.
Yes.
Oh,
In
no.
1348, Italian doctor Tommaso del Garbo offers specific guidance on how to protect oneself when visiting the sick. His recommendations included opening windows to ensure fresh air circulation and washing the face and hands with a mixture of rosewater and vinegar. To further shield themselves, he suggested keeping cloves of garlic in their mouths and consuming bread soaked in high quality wine, while emphasizing the importance of not standing too close to the patient.
I mean, bread soaked in high quality wine sounds kind of like, I don't know, man. About
If
that
you're
one.
going to be around some buboes, I want to be eating some bread dipped in wine. So the buboes would be lanced to drain the pus, which was quite painful, but not as painful as those doctors who would pour mercury over them, then bake or boil the person in an oven, which was not often very successful. Other cures included drinking the mercury, or alternatively arsenic. Also not successful. I mean, I guess you're successful in that you killed the plague.
Facts.
The 16th century royal surgeon Thomas Vickery touted the benefits of plucking a live chicken's butt and putting that on the buboes. So you pluck the butt. And then
So you put chicken butt?
Chicken butt. What's up,
What's
chicken
up,
butt?
chicken butt?
And we're going to laugh as you say, a typical plague victim died within 3 days of showing symptoms.
Oh,
Thanks to all of those wonderful scares. Yeah, I know. It was great timing. So in 1348, as the plague neared Paris, the King of France asked the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Paris what to do. This is how the science minds worked at that time. They assessed in 1345, this is in 1345, the planets Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter conjoined in the zodiac sign of Aquarius, which is a wet sign. And that naturally caused hot, moist air to blow across Europe. And that moist air left a plague wherever it passed. And since the villain was hot air, and frankly, it's a villain to me too, praise the central air conditioner, doctors recommended wearing or carrying either sweet or bitter substances like violets, wormwood, or vinegar, or if you were rich, a chunk of ambergris, which is a smelly secretion made in a sperm whale's intestinal lining, once considered a luxury item. Bad air was called miasma. Yes, ew. So bad air was called miasma and was thought to infect people through the lungs or skin. The air needed to be cleansed, so the doctors would suggest burning incense or other substances that smell bitter when burned. Spiders and toads were said to be able to absorb the air, and urine baths, along with bottled wind, were recommended. Now, bottled wind, I really hope is somebody farting in a jar.
Is this the first fart in a jar?
The first fart in a jar. Used to combat the plague. So when gunpowder became available, doctors also suggested firing cannons in the air to combat miasma. In the 1540s, the infamous Nostradamus was traveling around, and he was sometimes treating plague victims. His advice was to burn all the contaminated corpses. So he obviously was a hunter. He also created a lozenge made from rose hips, which we now know provides a good dose of vitamin C, which could have been helpful in fighting off infections. The English plague doctor Nathaniel Hodges administered to London during the Great Plague of 1665, and he at least tested the efficacy of some of the current turning treatments, like swallowing bezoar stones, which were made for animal entrails. Yes, like Harry Potter.
Like that's in Harry Potter.
Drinking potions made with unicorn horns, which was filings from a narwhal tusk. Oh. And using amulets like dried toads to drag out the plague, none of which proved successful. He was a fan of sweating, not like he like sweat himself, but he was a fan of like other people sweating, like going to sweat lodges and using that to like get the toxins out. And so he also really liked the ancient Greek remedy theriac, which was originally used for snake bites. And the Venice treacle version of it contained 64 ingredients, including viper flesh and opium, cinnamon, agaricon, and gum arabic. The ingredients were then pulverized and reduced to something mixed with honey. Also, to protect himself, he drank a lot of fortified white wine called sack. And which is also a thing, if we're going to be around the plague, I do recommend drinking a lot of fortified wine. Not because like, it helps you against the plague, just because you want to be drunk. Yeah. And he did not die of the plague, though. He did die instead in debtor's prison. Which is probably not a better way.
No.
All right, so let's talk about our outfit. While early medieval plague doctors did not wear the standardized outfits, by the 1600s, they commonly wore what we now associate with the plague doctors. The first description of this outfit is attributed to the French physician Charles de Lorme. Lorme, I don't know, fucking French. So he was a private doctor to 3 French kings and other members of the French nobility. In 1619, he wrote about the Parisian plague outbreak and described an outfit of Moroccan goat leather, including boots, breeches, a long coat, a hat, and gloves. Most famously, the outfit came with a bird-like mask with glass eyepieces and a long beak filled with perfume or aromatic herbs. The mask, or as I prefer to call it, the snout, because sometimes it was more of a hanging tube sock than a beak, and it would be stuffed with those herbs and spices. So think of it like an elephant.
Yeah, no, that's exactly.
Just kind of
imagine like a crappy sock filled with.
It really is like a crappy tube sock or an uncircumcised penis. Either way. So sometimes the herbs would be smoked before they got put into this hanging snout. And as they thought the smoke added an extra layer of protection against miasma. Vinegar sponges were also a popular addition. The mask had air holes, however, which were its downfall as a PPE device, and likely had how many plague doctors contracted the plague and died. Some would also add amuletic charms like papers with a prayer or words like abracadabra written out, and they would put that into their snout. The plague doctor's glass eyes were usually
snout.
The magic snout.
Okay.
There's a coming soon to you on Sesame Street. So the plague doctor's glass eyes were usually goggles, and these were tethered to the hood by a leather band. And this could be held to keep spurting pus out of one's eyes. And I had to fight with my computer about whether or not spurting was a word. And I'm like, I had to take polls of people and be like, yeah, like you spurt blood. So how, of course, because it was like, you want to say spurring pus? I'm like, no, I don't want to say spurring pus. I want to say spurting pus. That's what you do. You spurt pus. All right, so you didn't want to get the spurting pus in your eyes, so you would have these goggles on. And I can't imagine, like, I know Venetian glass is a thing, but I can't imagine it was very good glass.
No.
Yeah, so everything had to seem like kind of weird and far away. So the doctor also carried a cane or a long wooden stick that he also served to poke his patients, and just came in
Make sure
handy if
they
they
were
were
alive.
being aggressive or just too touchy or just to keep people away. There was one story about a doctor using his cane to poke a pus-filled groin, and I debated on leaving that in or not because of how gross of a picture that paints, but then obviously I left it in.
Clearly.
Clearly. So some patients were asked to be beaten or whipped by the plague doctor, as they saw the plague as a punishment from God. So he could also use his stick for that.
Oh.
The outer robe was sometimes made from linen, which sickness was said to roll off of, or goat skin, whose smaller pores were supposed to keep the plague from getting inside. The robe could be sealed with oil or wax for an extra layer of protection. Herbert Matty, in his article Men in Tights, Charles Delorme and the First Plague Costume, argues that Delorme was not talking about a long robe, but rather a pantalon that covered his whole body from head to toe, with an opening in the front and one in the back for bio needs, so which would resemble more of a coverall with integrated footwear, or as I imagine it, footed pajamas, which complete with the flap in the
And the
back, so
butt.
you could with the butt flap, right? But Maddie also noted that Delorme was credited with curing more than 10,000 soldiers of dysentery by having them crouch naked for a few hours over the fire of burning shoes, illustrating how some of the tales of his efforts may have been somewhat exaggerated. Additionally, this doctor who made the plague doc outfit was famous for wearing 7 pairs of stockings and 6 caps in the summer and 9 during the winter. Yeah, so the plague doctor outfit would have likely provided some protection against the plague, which we now know was mainly spread by fleas. The garments did cover the face and the body, shielding against airborne droplets, spatter blood, and lymphatic fluid. The robe, being leather or wax, did prevent fleas from clinging to the wearer's clothes and infesting them. So while they didn't really know what they were doing, they actually were kind of useful. Yep. So plague was gross.
Yeah. Real gross. Ew. Right. It was
Boobos.
pussy.
It was pussy. Boobos. It sounds like
Ew.
tea, like boobos
Like
tea.
boba, like boba.
Boo tea.
Boba.
Enjoy your
Bobos.
boobos tea.
Ew.
Ew.
Now I will never be able to eat those again.